y'all. Welcome back to the Don't Mom Alone podcast. I'm your host, Heather McFadden, and this is the place where I get to walk alongside you and connect you with people and resources so you know that you don't mom alone. And in this episode, number 482, it is week 5 of our summer of mentorship. And if you don't know what that is, every summer we go back in the archives and we republish previous conversations. And this summer, I am choosing conversations based on your questions. And one mom asked me about regulation. And when I mean regulation, it's, we did the episode with Kirk Martin. He said how to calmly parent our kids and how we can only control ourselves. But what if you struggle to regulate your own emotions, your anger, your sadness, your frustration, fight or flight response to chaos with kids? Well, my friend, Charissa Lopez, is a licensed professional counselor, and she came on the show in October of 2019. It was episode 260. We titled it Window of Tolerance, which I think most people were like, what does that even mean? And here's Charissa explaining a little bit why it's called that.
We call it the window of tolerance because this is where you learn how to tolerate life. And so in the window, imagine a baby, when an infant is born, their window is very small. They don't tolerate much. So when they get wet, they leave the window. When they get tired, they leave the window. When they get hungry, they leave the window.
This window of tolerance is a part of polyvagal theory, which is a part of regulation and attachment theory. And so everything we've been learning the last 2 weeks on the Summer Mentorship is going to come together in this conversation. And I want to highlight, before we get into it, something that's available to you on Charissa's website. Now, since we talked in 2019, Charissa has gotten married and she is no longer Charissa Fry. She is Charissa Lopez. And so go to her link in the show notes and get this amazing regulation pack she's created just for Don't Mom Alone listeners. It has tools that you can teach your kids about polyvagal theory and the window of tolerance with using animals. So helpful. PDFs you can print off, instructions. I think this is really helpful for not just understanding ourselves and our kids, but also advocating for our kids with teachers who interact with them. So go check that out in the show notes. I'll talk more about it at the end of the show, but let's get right to it. Here we go. Hey, Charissa, welcome to the Don't Mom Alone podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Talk to us about your passion on this window of tolerance and how it can help us as parents.
Okay, so getting into the window of tolerance, once I started learning about our nervous system and how regulation works, I was so amazed as a Christian how much what I was learning was also really reflected in Scripture. And it was such a helpful tool as a parent and also as a counselor, as I was working with clients, to just create a lot of self-awareness. And self-awareness is so important for us as parents and just as people living our lives, because once we're self-aware and we're paying attention to our feelings and what's going on in our life, we are so much more empowered to make good, healthy choices and live the lives that God has designed and called us to live. Looking at the window of tolerance, so just kind of imagine a window, and this is the part of our nervous system that pulls us into social engagement and connection. This is where we find an optimal amount of energy, where we can communicate well, where we feel connected and safe. This is where our thinking brain, sometimes you'll hear that term thinking brain, this is where our thinking brain is engaged. We can consider consequences. We have access to logic, to reason. We can problem solve. We can be curious. And this is also when we're in the window of tolerance, this is when we have an awareness of ourselves, of time, space, of others. So we're attuning in relationships with people. And this is also where we can feel our feelings, but not in an extreme way that feels out of control. So you can be in the window and you can feel sad and you can cry. You can feel in the window and be mad. And so we want a full awareness of our feelings in the window. That's a key part of it. When you imagine the window, now imagine leaving the window up. So leaving the window up is the part of our nervous system that pulls us into fight or flight. And that's called hyperarousal. So we're going into this fight or flight mode. So when a baby gets wet or tired or hungry and they just start screaming their little heads off, it's because they're communicating, I have a need and it's not being met and I'm feeling really terrible inside of my body. And so when we're in this place of fight or flight, our bodies do not feel good. We have too much energy, and it can look like rage. It can look like panic attacks. It can look like a lot of fear. When we're in this place in our nervous system, we might be yelling. We're defensive. We can be just kind of pacing. We might want to just run away. And one of the really important things to realize is our thinking brain is off in this part of our nervous system. We are no longer registering consequences. And so it's almost this feeling of like when you're talking to a teenager and you're saying, hey, if you do this, you're grounded. And they say, I don't even care. And it's like, okay, if you do it, you're grounded for 2 weeks. And they say, I don't even care. And they're just in this place of no matter what you're telling them the consequences, it is not registering because they're in this fight or flight place. And so I love this verse in Ephesians that says, parents, don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And that fits so beautifully. It's like, why do we not want to provoke our children to anger? Because when we provoke our children to anger, their thinking brains aren't on. They can't receive instruction. They can't be disciplined. And so that's why it's so important to pay attention to where our children are. If they go into this hyperarousal, they don't have access to their thinking brain. And we're wasting a lot of time and energy trying to logic and reason with them in that place.
We all know the transition back to school can be a lot. And when those seasons happen, I try to narrow in on what matters most. And for me, that's getting our family around the dinner table. And even with teenagers, and I know it's not going to happen every night, I need some support to make that goal happen. And so I use meal kits, and I've shared with y'all HelloFresh in the past. And did you know that now Green Chef is owned by HelloFresh? And so there's this wide array of meal plans to choose from. You can switch between the brands. And now, as my listeners, you can enjoy both brands at a discount with me. Now let's talk about Green Chef. What is fantastic is you get the same pre-portioned, prepped, quality whole foods, limited processed ingredients. Every week, there is a flexible menu with over 35 customizable recipe options every week. So if you want to double your portion of protein or veggies, you want to swap in a plant-based protein, they have dairy-free, gluten-free, vegetarian, vegan. There are over 15 recipes every week to support those lifestyles and so much more. If you're a family that needs a recipe in 25 minutes or less to cook and get it on the table, they have 15 weekly options for you. And I will tell you, when I served my family the Green Chef meals, they loved it. And I chose like a Mediterranean option, and they didn't skip a beat. They thought it was delicious. And so I feel like I hit a sub goal of presenting my family with food that's going to fuel their body well and what I want to eat. And so that's fantastic. Here's a really cool thing that's happening. For a limited time, you can upgrade your clean routine further with not just the Green Chef healthy menu, but also access to thousands of top-rated gyms and fitness studios worldwide from ClassPass. So for a limited time, new Green Chef subscribers will get 50 free credits to use at ClassPass, which is about a month's worth of membership. And I hope y'all will try it out, make your back to school a little bit easier. So go to greenchef.com/DMA class for 50% off your first box plus 50 free credits with ClassPass. The code is DMA class, CLASS, at greenchef.com/DMA class to get 50% off your first box plus 50 free ClassPass credits. And you'll agree with me that Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well. I think it's helpful for parents to know just how we are wired, that this is how we're wired. And it kind of feels like the entire culture is in this hyper arousal state right now. We're just fingers flying on Facebook, back at each other, freaking out on the highway, this hyper arousal state all the time. Are scientists and counselors seeing an increase in this?
I don't know if it's an increase as much as it is just an awareness of,
like, being able to define it better. What's going on?
Being able to define it. Because often when I'm sitting with parents and I'm going over this and I'm saying, okay, this is what it looks like to leave the window and go into fight or flight. And then we'll get into what it looks like when you go into this kind of shutdown collapse. So many parents and so many teenagers and so many kids, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't live in the window. I live in fight or flight, or I live in collapse. And so just putting words to it is so helpful. I do think our culture, we move so fast and we don't give a lot of space for feeling our feelings and having a safe place to unpack what's going on, or even just pause to pay attention because we're so busy. We have a million appointments and all the kids' things and all of our own things and church things and all the expectations. And so it's hard to stop and say, okay, but where am I right now?
Okay, so tell us about the collapse, because as you're saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so our culture does go there too. So we're in the extremes. So tell us, what would that look like for ourselves or for our kids?
Okay, so when we're leaving the window downward and we're going into this hypoarousal place, that's a place of...
You're saying hypo.
Hypo, yeah. Yes, hypo. That is the place we go, and it's kind of like an immobilized place. So that's when we have, like, instead of in hyper, fight or flight, where we have too much energy, now we have like no energy. This is just exhausted, tired. We feel like we have maybe no feelings or feel numb. Or we might, if you're talking to someone who's in hypo, they're just really like flat feelings. So it's just like very monotone. You might get a blank, checked out look from your kiddo if they're like that, like kind of trancing. There's like really long pauses when they're speaking, or they might just feel far away, like you almost want to tap on them and be like, "Are you with me? Come on, come back to the room, be with me," because they're going into this shutdown place. And so, in our culture, we talk about, just like binge watching shows, and that can be a lot of what it looks like when we've had a long day and we're just done and we just go lay on the couch for hours and do nothing. And so you can see this with teens especially.
Yeah, I was like, my 14-year-old, I feel like he's been going into this state more. Maybe it's around a birthday, but I think as he's gone back to school and with football, when he comes home, it's like, hello, like, it's harder to have a conversation. Chiming in here real quick as my 2024 Heather, listening to this 5 years later, now that I've had multiple 14-year-old boys, I don't know, maybe he was going out of the window, but I also think this is part of that differentiation process that all kids go through. And I think even Charissa and I did an episode on that, just that process of kids around middle school into high school identifying themselves separate from their parents. Anywho, just wanted to put that in there. Precious me with my oldest differentiating. It was new. If that's you and your oldest is pulling away and you're like still wanting to be the unit and you're idolizing the unit of your family, just want to give you that freedom and a little nod that I see you. You're not alone.
It becomes this place of almost like apathy and giving up. And this is where depression lives. And again, the thinking brain is not engaged in this section either. So it's like when a child or a teen goes to this really shut down place, you cannot engage their thinking brain, until you get them moving. And so in my office, I will do this thing. I will just pull out my really high-tech tool, which is a balloon that I've blown up, and I just throw it at them. And it's our natural thing to like hit it with our hand back to the other person. And so we just hit the balloon back and forth as we're chatting, and you see them start sitting up, start making eye contact, start laughing, start engaging. And then I've got their thinking brain back online and I'm getting them regulated. And then we can go into these deeper places of what's behind going into this immobilized place in the first place.
Yeah, that's good. So with moms, they could ask their kid, hey, you want to walk around the neighborhood with me?
Absolutely.
And that might be a good time to connect.
Yes.
And it's not, I mean, I don't feel like mine's depressed. I just feel like he's just like not talking all of a sudden. And he just says he's so tired.
Yes. And so like within the window, we are moving up and down in our regulation all day. So, like we wake up and we're lower. We're kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm waking up in the morning. Then it's like, as adults, we're like, okay, now I'm going to have my coffee. I'm going to get going. And then we're starting to have our lunch. And then we start to hit a little afternoon slump and we're starting to move down. And then, we get up from our desk, we go for a walk, we phone a friend, and then we kind of pull ourselves back up. And so we like all day long, if you notice, you're doing things to regulate yourself, whether that's coffee or a walk or a phone call or moving around, because we're constantly trying to get ourselves into the sweet spot of feeling okay. And so it's normal to be moving up and down. What we want to avoid, and that's when people are really living only in hyper arousal, that fight or flight, and only in that collapse freeze, that's when we start looking at, we probably need to bring in a third party to help us. Because when you're just living in those places of survival, it's really hard to do life because you can't connect with people.
And so people probably, do they start using other strategies, coping strategies to try to get back into the window?
Yes. So when we're in these extremes of the hyper arousal and hypoarousal, that's when we're the most susceptible to these maladaptive coping strategies. So all these behaviors that we want our kids to avoid and we don't want to be doing either, that's when we're most susceptible to them. Because, as we're learning how to build tolerance in the window, that's actually resilience. So we're building resilient kids when we help them learn how to stay in the window. But when they're living outside of the window, they actually become masters of survival. And the things that we learn how to do to survive as children, which that can be, for some little ones, it's like, I'm just going to be a super people pleaser because that is how I'm going to keep myself safe. If I'm really, really, really helpful and please a lot of people, they will love me and they will keep me around. Or it can look like avoidance. So some kiddos go into a place of, I'm going to be self-sufficient. I'm not going to need anything. I'm not going to have emotions. It can also look like withdrawal or isolation, or again, these kind of behaviors that, as parents, we start feeling, really scared are going to happen. But when kids are in that master of survival place, that's when they do start checking out in later stages to kind of, okay, I'm just going to play video games all the time. I'm going to start looking at porn. I'm going to start doing drugs, because these are the kind of things that actually temporarily might make us feel better in the moment, but they're really addressing how uncomfortable we feel in our bodies, how uncomfortable it feels to have too much energy, and how do I release that? How do I change that feeling quickly? Well, porn gives you that change in your body that feels good. And also in that collapse state, when you're totally numb and you have no feelings, or maybe it's such an intolerable feeling you're having, that's when kids can get into cutting, because it gives us a different feeling. And I know, like, as parents, we're like, oh my gosh, why would you ever do this to yourself? But it is so intolerable to feel nothing that they would rather feel pain. And so when they go into those really shut down places, that's when you start seeing those behaviors.
So you talked about how they become masters of survival. How, as parents, and the parents who are listening to this, they want to do the best that they can. And I know they're leaning on God to be their guide and to fill in the gaps. But what does it look like to create that secure attachment so that our kids don't have to move into those extreme places and become masters of survival where they go to negative coping mechanisms?
Yeah. So good news. We have this term in attachment theory that basically says to be a good enough mom that your kids turn out okay, you have to meet their needs about 30% of the time. which is just, I mean, there's part of me that's like,
Yes.
that's what the research shows. And it's like, okay, 30%. Like that's like 10 times that your kid's like, mom, like out of those 10, 3 of them, you're like, yes, dear.
And you respond and you get them food or you
yes.
listen to them. Oh, great. It's not 100%.
It's not 100%. And so
everyone feels better now. I hope that stat made you feel as good as it made me feel, even hearing it back all these years later. So much to manage as moms. And one thing I want to help you out with today, that now that I have had 3 teens go through the phone situation and my youngest is a middle schooler, I have his friends' moms reach out to me and say, how did you handle the phone situation? It's such a hot topic right now. And one fantastic tool that is great as we're going back to school and maybe your child is getting involved in sports or they're away from you more outside of school and you are wanting to connect with them, but you don't want to get them into social media and unlimited browsing on internet sites. A great option is Gab, and now is a fantastic time because they have a back to school sale. So what is Gab? It's basically the leader in safe smartphones and watches for kids, teens, and tweens. There are no social media apps, no internet browser, and there's GPS tracking. These devices are built from the ground up specifically for kids and teens. And so it's a great way to keep your kids safely connected. I have used it with a couple of mine transitioning into their adult phones. And it's awesome because it gives them what they want to connect with their friends, but you can be confident that it is safe. They get unlimited talk and text with Gab Messenger. And here's something new that they've added technology that when your kids want to do video chatting, which is they love video calling through their app, Gab Messenger will block high-risk messages, and if nudity pops up on the screen, they will blur it and shut off the phone, and they will let you know because through Gab, you have an app where you manage all the devices, and you can see how much your child's using it, who's calling them. It's a great way to control a phone from your phone. I could go on and on, honestly. If we were just in a chat, I would tell you all the things that I love. They even have a watch, which is great for younger kids that you need to connect with them. Maybe it's even on a family vacation. That's when we've gotten a Gab watch and you want to connect. You choose how many phone numbers go in the watch. Anyway, now is a great time if you are in this zone and you need to solve this problem for your family, because Gab is offering huge discounts on phones and watches to new customers. And the best part, there is no contract required. So just go to gab.com/DMA to get started. That's Gab, GABB.com/DMA, gab.com/DMA. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Going back to what Charissa was saying about we only need to meet 30% of our kids' needs, I hope that frees you up to maybe add in some self-care. And I would love to know, if we were in a conversation, what your self-care non-negotiables are. Maybe you never skip a leg day or a therapy day. I feel like if you've heard some of what Charissa's saying, particularly when it comes to how we can use coping mechanisms to help us get back into the window, that maybe if you've been thinking about therapy, you are even more prompted by this conversation to dig into what's going on in you to help you be a better mom. And maybe you can meet more than 30% of those needs of your kids. I feel like what I've learned from Charissa in my own therapy journey has helped me become a better mom, more self-aware, and notice when I'm out of the window and when I'm resorting to unhelpful coping mechanisms. And maybe you're the same and you've been thinking about starting therapy. So it's a great option to try BetterHelp. It's entirely online. And so it's perfect for moms. It's convenient. It's flexible. It's suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And then you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/DMA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/DMA.
So just imagine, like, I think it's so easy to see with infants. Like, we're holding an infant that's crying. What are we doing? We're holding them close to our bodies. We're breathing with them. We're doing that shh, shh, shh. We're rocking. We're patting. That's co-regulation. We are connected to them. And because we are calm, they can lean into the calmness, after we're meeting those needs, and they can lean into that calmness and be regulated with us. And as children get older, so then imagine a toddler. So when a toddler has their ice cream and there's liquid and it falls onto the ground and they immediately leave the window, my ice cream, oh my goodness, and they're just losing their little minds. And then we try and engage, they're in hyperarousal in that fight flight. And then we try and engage their thinking brain. I'll just get you another ice cream. Why are you crying? This is not a big deal. Look, here's another ice cream, but I don't have my ice cream. And it's like this, it doesn't make sense anymore. And so that's when we have to notice, okay, they're in hyperarousal. The logic isn't working. So that's when get on your knees on their level, open your arms, pull them close. It's okay. This is hard. Oh my gosh, you're so sad about your ice cream. And so they can calm down because you are calm and you're inviting them into that regulated space. And once they join you there, then you can say, hey, do you want to get another ice cream? Okay.
Right.
And then we can move forward. So really, co-regulation is just responding to the needs of our children by being safe, wise, and showing that we have the power to keep our children safe and make wise choices on their behalf, and that we're kind. And so if children have, sometimes in the playroom, we call it a safe boss. I'm your safe boss. I'm here for you. I know what to do, and I'm kind, and I just delight to be with you. Gosh, that's what kids are longing for. And so if we can be that about 30% of the time, then our kids learn the skill of living in the window, being able to tolerate life even when it's uncomfortable, and building resilience.
Yeah, because when you first told me about this, I felt so much guilt. Oh my stars, I've messed up so many times. Responded to this dropped ice cream with, what? Why did you do that? Instead of feeling the emotion or reflecting back what they're, feeling. And so to know 30% feels a lot better, a lot better. But what do we say to that parent who maybe the co-regulating isn't happening because they're not in the window of tolerance themselves? How do we help that parent not feel guilt or shame, but be that safe boss?
And I love for parents to have open communication with their kids on this and say, you know what, as a family, we've been yelling too much and I don't feel good in my body when I yell. And I know you don't feel good in your body when I yell or when you yell. And so we're going to do a family reset. That's when the mom and dad are going to talk about modeling, okay, when I'm feeling so angry, I need to take a break. And so we model and verbalize out loud to our children, I am so upset. I'm going to go in my room and take a time out, take some deep breaths, and I am going to come back for you. And so we're not leaving without saying anything. We're not creating a sense of when our kid gets upset that we just disappear and don't come back. So we're communicating verbally to them, I'm upset. I'm going to go take my deep breaths. I will come back for you and we will keep talking about this. And so giving ourselves as parents permission to step away for a moment, to take some deep breaths and get back online. Because one thing I think is really helpful to be aware of is if I am dysregulated, I cannot regulate my child. So if I'm in fight or flight and I'm yelling, there's no amount of yelling that brings my child back into the window. And sometimes parents think the yelling is working, but what you're doing, the child isn't going into the window, they're going into collapse. And they're going into that fear place of like, I'm just going to get really still and small because I am so afraid of what is going to happen if I don't. And so sometimes it feels like, oh, my yelling is working. And it's like, no, you're just sending your child into a collapsed
You're getting
state.
Temporary control. I mean, that's when I would use yelling. When I had all the 4 young babies, it was like, I just need control right now. And the way I get control is by being bigger and louder, because you all feel much bigger than me to have 4 of you to manage. And so I felt out of control. And yes, so then I would, but you're right, it does. It just creates them. They're not engaging and learning. They're just shutting down, unless they have that personality, the challenger personality.
Right.
And then they join you in the hyperarousal, and then you're faced toe to toe, and they become the spokesperson for all the kids. And so that becomes a different, the dynamic in that relationship gets not so great. I mean, you're relating, but not in a way that is soft and cozy and warm, but more just a lot of conflict and aggression. So
yeah, and no one's in their thinking brain.
No.
So you have a whole room of people that are not thinking anymore, not thinking about consequences. When especially you can see that when you have a kiddo that has been keeping it together all day at school, they're trying to have that self-control all day at school, staying in the window, trying to be the kid that, you're raising them to be. And then they come home and it's like, and they're just going crazy because they have all this energy stored up. So my mom used to send me to run around the cul-de-sac when I got home from school, because I was that kid that was like so perfect at school, and I'd come home and just go nuts and so
fall apart,
running laps around the neighborhood before I came back home.
Oh, okay. All so helpful. Let's talk about the spiritual angle to this for those who are followers of Jesus and want to know more how we can integrate, like you did at the beginning with Ephesians. Like, how do we integrate this science that is supporting what God created us? So it's not new to him. But what else have you learned as you've been researching this and working with clients?
So one of the things that has really stood out to me is that when we're living in the window and living in this regulated place, when you think about the fruit of the Spirit, self-control, kindness, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, love, those traits are available to us in the window. But when we leave the window, we're not typically having a lot of self-control. We're not typically having a lot of joy. We're not very gentle or kind when we're in fight or flight mode, because we're surviving and we kind of don't care. We're just trying to get through it. And so for me, it has been helpful to kind of be aware of the idea of walking in the Spirit, that because we have the Spirit within us, that in Philippians 2:13, God promises he gives us the desire and the power to do what he calls us to do. And he delights to grow the fruit of the Spirit in our life. And so to lean into that truth, that when we live in the window and we feel like we keep leaving the window, that we can lean into the Lord's promise that he is delighting to grow the fruit in our life that looks like self-control and kindness and patience and joy. And so I think that part is really an important piece to just kind of notice, like, gosh, walking in the Spirit feels a lot like being regulated and living in the window. And we have supernatural access to power that helps us do that.
Yeah, I was reading today in 2 Thessalonians, like, it's not that God asks us to live this way and then leaves us on our own. It said you may not even have faith, but God's faithful. He'll even direct our hearts to his love. Like, he's going to be the motivator and the power source and the director of these things. It doesn't have to be this pull yourself up by the bootstraps, mom. You need to be a better mom. You should get into this window. It's all up to you. I think it's like the third aspect of my don't mom alone is that you don't, that God is with you, that the Holy Spirit is empowering you. And the mom that you want to be is right at your disposal if you turn to God and say, be alive in me. Help me live as Christ. Like, help me.
Well, then when you're talking about not being alone, yes, because this other beautiful part of attachment theory that we're starting to lean into more is that God himself, through Jesus, is like the ultimate attachment figure. He is always reaching for us. He never fails to respond to our needs. He always loves us. He is never judging us, never shaming us. So to know that when we need to be co-regulated, that when I am feeling like I'm going to leave the window, that I can remember the truth of who God is, that I can reach out to him in prayer. Those things are regulating to us as believers, because we have this like all powerful God who adores us and is so delighted to hear from us. So I think that aspect of we're not alone because of God. And then the second aspect of we're not alone because we have the family of God. Because
yes.
In Ephesians 5, it talks about, instead of being, like you said, living in the fruits of the flesh. So we go into these fight or flight or collapse modes, and we're tempted to go into these really fleshly places of, drinking or checking out or being angry or controlling through people pleasing or perfectionism. Instead of doing those things, we can be filled with the Spirit. And it says, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. And what we know about regulation is rhythm, dance, singing, doing that corporately and together is incredibly regulating. And we have in Scripture that says, if we participate in the body of Christ and we do these things together, we are regulating ourselves. And that's part of how God has designed us. And then he's given instructions in his word about how to live this life that he's called us to live and is empowering us to live. So it's really beautiful.
And you also mentioned to me like just this power of community, that this family of God can heal the wounds from our family of origin. If you are feeling like, maybe your parents didn't even give you that 30%. Mm-hmm. And there are real wounds, and you were a master of survival, and you haven't told a soul. You have never talked to a professional counselor. You have never told a friend, and you've just been walking life with this pain. I just think it's really powerful what you said about the family of God and this corporateness and this centering and this healing available to us when we let people in and let people know that that's part of God's design too.
It is. And one thing I think, especially if your story is one of being a master of survival, is to be aware that when we have lived as survivors and we are used to just enduring, and we kind of don't know what it really feels like to be loved and connected and safe because our body never had that when we were little, that intimacy, vulnerability, authenticity are actually triggering, because it is so uncomfortable to feel those things when you've never been safe.
Right.
And so it feels very, very risky when you're a master of survival to risk trust, to risk sharing, to risk being vulnerable.
And every little thing that looks like an attack or a discounting of that vulnerability causes you to pull away again.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, oh, I knew it.
See?
Now I'm going back to my fight or flight. Yep. Nope.
Fight
I'm
or
going
flight
back
or
to my hole.
collapse. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, Charissa, this is super, super helpful. Is there like a book on this? Are you going to write a book on this? Or is there a resource we can point people to if they want to learn more on this topic?
Well, I will have the infographic posted on my website.
Okay.
And yeah, on the website, they'll have the infographic, and then I'll have another couple of resources.
Is there a book for kids that you can talk to them about these states and this window?
Yes. There's a great kids book. I think it's called Rosie's Brain. And I read this with my son, and it talks about the different parts of our amygdala. It doesn't go over it in the same way that we just went over it, but it helps kids access, when their amygdala takes over, which is that fight or flight place. It can be helpful for that. So okay. I'll put that on there too.
Okay. Thank you for taking time today. And I will link to your website in the show notes. Y'all can find Charissa there. And just really appreciate it. Appreciate you encouraging us and teaching us and training us on how to be the kind of parents we want to be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Thanks, y'all, for joining us. One way I mentioned at the beginning, those infographics or PDFs that Charissa created are great tools as you're heading into the school year to communicate if your child goes into fight or flight or goes into collapse, to collaborate with your teachers and come up with plans to help them instead of them getting labeled as silly or as just unproductive or lazy. I have found that one of mine that easily falls in and out of the window, this was a great way to talk to teachers and come up with a plan of in order to help use movement, maybe have them go to the nurse's office, not as a punishment, but as like, oh, I think it's time to go see nurse so-and-so, or, hey, can you help me move this pile of books from here to here? Just any kind of movement to get them back into the window. Anywho, I'm going to pray for us. Lord, I thank you that you are with us. I thank you that you are present and meet our needs, and that we can be vulnerable with you and we can trust that you are there. I thank you for your spirit, that when we are centered and walking in step with your spirit, that we are able to think clearly, problem solve, have the fruit that is patient and kind and loving and the kind of moms we want to be. And I pray for each person listening who is processing their own journey of their childhood, maybe shame or guilt about how they've parented in the past, that they can recognize the newness of today, that they can lean into your spirit and your movement of healing and restoring with them, that you are always present, always loving, always kind. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thanks y'all for joining me today. I hope you heard my last episode was on Friday with Cynthia, our August sidetracked. I hope you enjoyed a little laughter in your end of summer. Someone said it was their doldrums, that they were like, the sibling fighting was up and they needed a good laugh. So I hope we provided that for you. And then next Monday is week 6 of the summer mentorship. I can't believe it. How is this happening? Summer is wrapping up. Y'all can pray for me between now and then. I will have launched my oldest in college, dropped him off at University of Tennessee. Hard to believe. Here we are. So for all of you other moms of college kids, I see you through my bleary eyes. Anywho, have a great week. Adios. Bye.